My name is Ines. I'm 20 years old. I've always been determined to achieve everything on my own. Since childhood, I had to rely only on myself. Weakness was never encouraged in this house. When I was accepted to college on a full scholarship, I thought I had finally broken free from the weight of parental control. It was like a long-awaited deliverance. The scholarship covered my tuition, but there was one significant issue: housing. Mom found what she thought was the perfect solution. "You know, this apartment that I got from your grandmother 4 years ago. Why don't you take it off?" she said one evening while we were sitting in the kitchen. "I'll give you a good price, much lower than in other places." I did a little research and made sure she wasn't lying. The rent she requested was indeed almost half the market price. Of course, I would still have to look for a job to cover the cost of food and utilities, but overall it looked like a great opportunity. "You'll need to sign a proper lease agreement," Mom added, taking out the prepared papers. I wasn't surprised by her formality. She always believed that rules were more important than feelings. After signing the documents, I quickly found a job in a small cafe near the campus. It was a hard job, especially when combined with studying, but I managed. The days merged into a single rhythm: early risers, lectures, shifts in cafes, and then sleepless nights with textbooks. I was exhausted, but I was proud of myself. I was coping. Until that very Thursday. I remember that day very well. The shift at the cafe turned out to be especially difficult: endless orders, the whims of visitors, noise, and the clink of dishes. All I wanted to do was collapse on the couch, watch something relaxed, and maybe even fall asleep in front of the screen. But when I opened the apartment door, I froze on the threshold. My younger sister, Arabella, is sitting comfortably on my couch with her legs propped up on the armrest. There were 2 large suitcases nearby. She was scrolling through the tape on her phone without even looking in my direction. "What are you doing here?" My voice sounded sharper than I'd planned. She looked up lazily, as if I'd distracted her from something important. "Oh, hello. I'm moving in with you." Mom said it's okay. My head was buzzing. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed my mother's number. My hands were shaking. "Mom, what's going on?" "Arabella says she's moving in with me." "Is she going to pay the rent?" The answer hit like a slap in the face. "Are you crazy, Inez? What kind of stupid questions are these? Of course, Arabella doesn't pay rent. You will continue to pay the same amount as you paid, and she will live there for free." I could barely control the indignation that rose in my throat. "It's not fair. If she lives here, she has to pay at least half." Her mother's voice became hard, icy, the way it became when she wasn't going to have a discussion. "Listen to me carefully, Inez. This apartment belongs to me. I decide who pays what. If you don't like it, you can move out tomorrow." I tried to look for other housing options, but everything was much more expensive than I could afford. Swallowing my pride, I resigned myself. Living with Arabella turned out to be a real challenge. She never thought about the comfort of others. She didn't help around the house, didn't pay for utilities, and behaved as if I just happened to be in her personal space. Every morning I woke up and found that the lights were on in every room: in the kitchen, in the living room, in the bathroom. "Arabella, please turn off the light when you leave the room," I asked one day, trying to speak calmly. She didn't even look at me. "Stop being so tense," she waved off, continuing to scroll through her phone. I clenched my teeth. It's not that important, but the light was just the beginning. The real nightmare is her bathroom habits. Arabella locked herself in there for hours, taking endless baths and chatting on the phone with her friends. The sound of running water became the soundtrack to my anxiety. Sometimes she turned on the music at full volume, and the booming bass echoed in the walls of the apartment. I tried to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to stay calm. One evening, when I was preparing for an exam, the water had been pouring for more than 2 hours. "Hi, Arabella," I called, knocking on the bathroom door. "You've been there forever. Do you even realize how much water you're wasting?" Her voice, muffled by the door, sounded annoyingly carefree. "I have a spa day. Mom says I can do whatever I want." I clenched my teeth, trying not to get emotional, and went to my room. I should have been concentrating on my textbooks, but my thoughts now revolved only around the water bill, which would inevitably arrive in the near future. And so, 3 hours later, when the water finally stopped flowing, I received confirmation of my worst fears. There was a fresh utility bill in the mailbox. I tore open the envelope with trembling hands and froze. The amount was twice as much as I usually paid. Standing in the kitchen, I looked at the numbers, and panic gradually built up inside me. How should I handle this on top of all the other expenses? Working in a cafe barely covered rent, food, and travel, and now I had to somehow find extra money, which I simply did not have. That evening I found Arabella in the living room. She was sprawled on the couch, with an open box of food on the coffee table in front of her, and the voices of bloggers were coming from her phone, turned on at full volume. "We need to talk about the utility bills," I said, coming closer. I had that ill-fated bill in my hands. She didn't even turn her head. "They've doubled since you moved in. You need to be more aware of your water and electricity consumption." Arabella finally spared me a glance. There was a smirk on her lips. "Or what?" I gritted my teeth. "Or you'll have to find another place to live." This phrase finally caught her attention. She straightened up, squinting. "I'm sorry, but Mom said I can do whatever I want here." She paused, savoring every word. "You're supposed to serve me, remember?" "That's exactly what Mom said." Something snapped inside me. All the anger, all the injustice, all the pain that I had been holding back for so long came out. "Get out," I said icily. She screamed and jumped to her feet. "What did you say?" "This isn't your apartment," I continued, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm paying for it. And I'm saying, you're leaving now." We stood in tense silence, eyes crossed. The air in the room was electrified. And then Arabella exhaled noisily and, hissing curses, began to throw her things into suitcases. She was slamming drawers, throwing clothes off hangers, making as much noise as possible. I watched this in silence, crossing my arms over my chest. When her suitcases finally arrived at the door, she whirled on me, her face contorted with anger. "You're going to regret this," she said through clenched teeth. I didn't say anything. I just watched her go out, slamming the door so hard that the glass in the window shook. I barely had time to catch my breath when my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I knew this was going to happen. My hand was shaking when I answered. "What are you doing?" Her voice was so loud that I pulled the phone away from my ear. "Who do you think you are to kick your sister out?" "Mom." "Shut up." "Stop it," she snapped. "You have no right. Now pack your bags and get out. Either you leave, or I'll double your rent. Your choice." The rage that had been building up in me for weeks was finally pouring out. "You know what?" My voice was shaking, but not from fear, but from anger. "I'd rather pay 5 times that elsewhere than spend another minute dealing with this nightmare." Before she could answer, I hung up the phone. I burst into the bedroom and yanked the suitcase out from under the bed. She started throwing clothes in there without even bothering to fold them. Tears of anger clouded my vision as I rushed around the apartment, packing my things. Anger burned in me with every second, with every object that I stuffed into the suitcase. When I got to the bookcase, I started taking out textbooks. They were heavy and uncomfortable, and due to sudden movements they constantly slipped out of my hands, hitting the floor with a thud. Frustrated, I slammed the closet door shut. And that's when it happened. Several thick books that I hadn't noticed on the top shelf collapsed down. One of them hit me right on the head. Pain shot through my temple, and I barely restrained myself from cursing out loud. "Just perfect," I muttered, rubbing the bruised spot. As I bent down to pick up the books, my eyes caught on something unusual. There was a piece of paper lying on the floor among the fallen pages. He obviously fell out of one of the books, slipping between their pages. At first I thought it was just a forgotten bookmark or an old receipt, but when I unfolded it, I froze. It was a legal document, copied, but perfectly readable. There was an inscription in bold at the top. "Testament and Last Will." My heart stopped. At the bottom was my grandmother's name and the date, just a few months before her death. I slowly reached for the paper, feeling my hands tremble. My eyes darted over the lines until I found the key phrase. "I bequeath the funds to my daughter and granddaughter Arabella. And the apartment at the address. I'm transferring full ownership to my granddaughter Ines." I sank to the floor, clutching the document in my hands. My head was buzzing, and fragments of memories flashed before my eyes, forming a nightmarish picture. My mother's voice echoed in my head. 4 years ago. Grandmother's funeral. We were sitting in the living room, surrounded by relatives, when Mom announced. Mom left everything to me. Her voice was steady, confident, devoid of emotion. All the property, all the money. She wanted me to take care of everything. She looked around the room, and no one dared to ask her a question. No one doubted her words. Except for me. I remember timidly raising my hand, like a schoolgirl, afraid to say something wrong. "But Mom, why didn't Grandma leave anything for Arabella and me?" A flash of annoyance in her eyes, disguised as pity. "Inez, these things are complicated. It was her decision. And we have to respect him. You just have to accept it. Accept it." Those words sounded completely different now that I had a document in front of me exposing the lie. I remembered how in the following months, Arabella suddenly started wearing designer clothes and always appeared with the latest iPhone models. How Mom and Arabella went to Paris and Milan, calling it a tour of Europe to bring mother and daughter closer. How I stayed at home, working at a grocery store in the summer to afford to pay for housing and school. Now I knew where they got the money from. They were spending their grandmother's inheritance. They squandered it in front of my eyes. They probably laughed at how I hadn't even thought about it. But the apartment. My apartment. They didn't just hide the truth. They forced me to pay for a place that rightfully belonged to me. I covered rent, electricity, and water bills. Every month, I sent money to my mother, thinking that it was payment for the opportunity to live here, when in fact it was my legitimate property. I clenched my teeth so hard that my jaw hurt. Rage boiled inside me, icy, piercing, burning from the inside out. I looked at the phone. The missed call from Mom was still flashing on the screen. And at that moment, I realized that she wouldn't get away from it that easily. I worked in that cafe, squeezing out every dollar, living in a place that was legally mine. Bitter irony. The lease agreement hit me like a slap in the face. I could practically hear my mom's voice. "We need to do everything right, Inez. I'm very picky about these things. Everything must be properly documented and filed." I laughed harshly, and the sound echoed through the empty apartment. Especially about paperwork. Except, apparently, for the case when it was about telling her daughter that her grandmother had left her an entire apartment. That little detail had somehow slipped out of her mind. The more I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. All those times when my mom reminded me that it was time to pay the rent. How she lectured me on adulthood and responsibility. while I was paying off the rent for the apartment that had always been mine. The way she smiled when I thanked her for being so generous, for being able to pay less than others in the area. And now, just a few hours ago, she was threatening to kick me out from my apartment. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. I carefully photographed every page of the will, making sure that every word was clear and legible. Then I clicked Send to Mom. The message was delivered instantly. After a few seconds, 2 blue check marks appeared. She saw him. I stared at the phone screen, watching 3 dots appear and disappear. My mother was always so quick to respond. She always had an answer ready. But now she was hesitating. I could almost imagine her sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers clenched on the phone, her mind racing in search of the right words. 10 minutes have passed. 20.30. The dots appeared and disappeared like Morse code. Every time they appeared, I tensed up, waiting for her answer. Every time they disappeared, I felt a strange, dark satisfaction. She didn't know what to say. A whole hour. The phone finally rang. I took a deep breath and answered. Inez, honey. Her voice was artificially calm, affectionate, as if nothing had happened. This was the tone she always used to smooth over troubles, trying to overplay the situation in her favor. It's not what you think. Because I think that's exactly what I think it is. She ignored me and continued as if I hadn't said anything. I've been wanting to tell you about this for so long. There was something like a sigh in her voice. I just couldn't find the right moment. But since you found out, now you can take the apartment. She's yours. Let's just forget about this unpleasant business and start over. I laughed harshly. Shall we start over? I could hear her tense up on the other end of the line. Do you want me to just forget? I got up from the floor, clutching the phone so that my fingers turned white. Have you forgotten that you had your grandmother's will and you hid it from me? Have you forgotten that you tried to kick me out of my apartment just a few hours ago? Have you forgotten that I've been paying you rent for almost 2 years for a place that has always belonged to me? Inez, please. No, Mom. I interrupted her, preventing her from taking control for the first time in my life. I want to give you back every penny. Every rent payment I've made to you. I want every last cent back. There was a deathly silence on the other end of the line. 1 minute. 2. I could hear her breathing, I could hear her holding back her words, as she scrolled through the exit options in her head. But she knew I couldn't lie anymore. When she spoke again, her voice was icy, completely devoid of its former sweetness. You wouldn't dare. I smiled. After all we've done for you, Inez? There was a hysterical note in her voice. Would you sue your own mother? After everything you've done to me? My voice was steady. I heard her inhale sharply. I didn't give her time to respond by saying, You mean you stole my inheritance, forced me to pay rent on your property, and then tried to kick me out when I wouldn't let a freeloader in here? I paused, feeling anger bubbling up inside. So yes, I would dare. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the realization that I would no longer let her rule my life. I opened the banking app and started scrolling through my transaction history. 23 months of lease payments, each of which was carefully documented. I always kept track of expenses, a habit for which my mother ironically praised me. I took out my savings book and started making calculations. No longer paying rent, I could afford to hire a lawyer. A good lawyer. Every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of paper related to this apartment, from the day I moved in, I have saved it all. The law office was quiet and professional. The dark wood of the furniture, the shelves hung with books, the smell of paper and coffee. I was sitting across from Miss Roberts, a short woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair and attentive, sharp eyes. She was carefully flipping through the documents I had brought: the will, lease agreements, bank statements. When she finished, she looked up at me. "It's pretty simple," she said, her voice flat but sympathetic. "Your grandmother obviously bequeathed this apartment to you. Your mother had no legal right to collect rent, either from you or from anyone else." I leaned forward. "What can I do?" She put down the papers and took out a notebook. "You're entitled to compensation," she explained calmly. "Not only for the 23 months that you paid the rent, but also for 2 years before that, when your mother rented the apartment to other tenants." We spent the next hour doing calculations. Miss Roberts methodically sorted everything by month: the regular rent payments I made, plus the amounts my mother had received from previous tenants. She wrote the numbers, adding columns based on market rates at that time. When she finally pushed the final amount toward me, I had to blink twice. $97,500, she said. "We'll round it up to 60,000 for simplicity." My head was spinning. I gripped the pen tighter, trying to focus. "You can also claim interest payments," she added. "Your parents actually used an interest-free loan of your money for almost 4 years. We could calculate standard interest rates." "No," I interrupted. "Only the rent." "That's enough." After completing the paperwork, I left the building and, without wasting time, dialed my mom's number. My voice was more balanced than I expected. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come to the apartment tomorrow? Bring the documents for the property." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," she finally said. Her voice was strained. The next morning, I heard a key turning in the lock. She came in with a nervous smile, holding a manila envelope in her hands. "I brought the title deeds," she said, clutching the envelope with her fingers. "Everyone is here to transfer the apartment to your name. I've already prepared them." She spread out the papers on the kitchen table. The very table where she forced me to sign the lease 2 years ago. The irony did not escape me. "Inez, dear," she looked at me, pushing the papers closer. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I beg your pardon. Please don't be mad at me. We can put this behind us and—" I cut her off. I calmly handed her another document. A demand letter prepared by my lawyer. "You have 2 weeks to pay off the $60,000 you took from me." As soon as my mother finished reading the demand letter, all pretended remorse evaporated. She jumped up from her chair with such force that it crashed to the floor, shaking the room. And then the screaming started. "You ungrateful little witch! Stop it," she screamed, her voice soaring to such a pitch that it seemed the glass in the windows rattled. "How dare you do this to your mother?" Her words echoed through the apartment, and for a second it seemed to me that plaster dust had fallen from the ceiling. The neighbors must have thought that someone was being killed. I forced myself to remain calm. "You can scream all you want, Mom," I said in a flat voice. "It won't change anything. Either you pay me what you owe me, or I'll sue. Think about it. Fraud charges, legal fees, your reputation in society. Your choice." Her face was contorted, and her lips were trembling with rage. She clenched her fists, as if preparing to throw something heavy at me, but instead turned around and stormed out of the apartment. The door slammed shut so hard that the paintings on the walls rattled, and her hurried, heavy footsteps and shrill screams could still be heard in the hallway. I thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. Within an hour, the calls started coming in. My father first. "How could you do this to us?" He thundered into the phone. "After all we've done for you. You are an ungrateful, petty child." I laughed bitterly. "Ungrateful? Petty? Is that what you're telling me? The parent who tricked his daughter into paying rent for his own apartment? There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Where was your conscience when you cashed my checks every month? He muttered something about family loyalty, but I wasn't listening anymore. I just clicked end call. Next came a call from Arabella. You're going to ruin everything. Stop it, she howled. If Mom and Dad have to pay you all this money, they won't be able to pay for my college. I crossed my arms over my chest, grinning. Is that what you want? Ruin my future? Your future is not my problem, Arabella. Would you like to try what I did? Find a job. Work hard. Save up the money, asterisk asterisk. You don't understand. Stop it, she screamed, but I had already passed out. The calls didn't stop. Mom screamed and cried, begging, threatening, cursing me. My father gave tedious lectures about family, duty, and respect. Arabella was howling, accusing me, manipulating me. Sometimes they even called from unknown numbers when I blocked their contacts. But a week later, everything changed. The father called in a different tone. We're dating. We need more time, he said, his voice hoarse, strangled. Can you give us a month instead of 2? I thought about it. The lawyer advised that an extra month was a reasonable compromise. 1 month. Not a day more. Okay. The next 4 weeks were suspiciously quiet. No more phone calls. No attempts to force pity. No shouting or cursing. I started to worry that they were up to something. But exactly 1 month after my mother's tantrum in my kitchen, I checked my bank account. There was $60,000 in it. Fully translated. 3 months have passed. One evening, Aunt Rita called me. She's always been a family gossip girl, but this time I was grateful for her habit of sharing information. Your parents had to take out a bank loan to pay you back, she said in a conspiratorial tone. They're really struggling with payments now. I was silent, listening to her continue. Rita paused, as if giving me an opportunity to realize the significance of the next news. She's not in college anymore. They can't afford her tuition. I heard my aunt sigh. Now she's just sitting at home complaining about how you ruined her life. I thought about it. Arabella, who has never worked a day in her life. Arabella, who always expected that everything would be given to her on a platter. Maybe it's time for her to learn how to get back on her feet, I said, leaning on the couch. My grandmother's sofa. And then it dawned on me as clearly as if I was watching a movie. I was going to go to the notary with my mom. It was an important day. I remember how worried I was. I put on my best black dress, trying to look mature and responsible. And then Mom came into my room. She looked worried. Arabella is ill, she said. She has a fever. You need to stay at home with her. I remember feeling disappointed, but I accepted it, just another sacrifice for my sister. Now I realize that Arabella probably wasn't sick at all. It was just another manipulation. Another lie in a long line of dissections. But the question that keeps me awake at night is not why my mother stole my inheritance. I understand greed. But I can't figure out how she got away with it so easily. I asked Aunt Rita about the notary. She didn't know much, but her theory made sense. The notary probably just took my mother's word for it. Maybe Mom brought a stack of documents, pretending to take them home to share with her family. And no one doubted. The worst part is how every moment of the past now seems to be ruined. Mom praised me for being responsible about money. Was she laughing to herself when she insisted on an official lease agreement? Was she proud of her intelligence? Did she and Dad discuss this dissection over dinner? Did you congratulate each other on the perfect plan? I still live in my grandmother's apartment. In my apartment. But now this place feels different because I no longer pay rent for something that already belongs to me. I started saving money that I used to send to my mom every month. Sometimes I look at my bank account and smile, thinking about how much things have changed. Last week, the cafe where I work offered me a promotion to assistant manager. Some people might think that I don't need this job anymore since I'm no longer paying rent. But I've learned the value of independence. From their own money. From their own labor. From what no one else can take away from me. Sometimes their names still light up on my phone. Mom. Dad. Arabella. I've blocked their numbers, but they keep calling from new ones. I delete their voicemails without listening. What can they say? Sorry, we stole your inheritance. Sorry, we made you pay rent for your property. Sorry, we were only caught because books fell on your head. I'm fine. I go to classes. I work in a cafe. In the evenings, I redo the apartment to make it more like my personal space, rather than a crime scene. But sometimes, usually late at night, the anger is coming back. Not just because of the theft, but because of years of lying. Because of the daily brutality. Because they made me believe that Grandma didn't care about me. It's like she didn't leave me anything. My therapist says it's okay. That it's not just about the money or the apartment. It's about trust. In the family. Of betrayal. She helps me deal with it, teaches me to stay calm when memories threaten to overwhelm me. I've started a new tradition. Every Sunday morning I sit in my grandmother's old reading chair by the window. I drink coffee from her favorite mug. I'm thinking about her. That she wanted me to have this place. That she trusted me to take care of it. At such moments, I feel close to her again. As if some part of her knows that the truth has finally come out. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.